All right, welcome in everyone. Today on the deep dive, we are heading to Italy, but not to those usual spots. The heavy hitters
Yeah.
that everyone knows.
Tuscany, Piedmont.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be diving deep into the wines of Molise, and what's interesting about this is that it's a region with some really ancient winemaking traditions. But
Yeah.
for a lot of wine lovers out there, it's still a bit of a secret, like a
Kind of hidden gem.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A hidden gem.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we've gone through a ton of material, historical accounts, going back centuries, analysis of the terroir, and
Yeah.
we even got some insights from folks that are really in the know about these wines.
Yeah, and our goal today is pretty simple. We want to uncover, those special things that make Molise wine so unique.
Right.
And hopefully by the end you'll be just as excited about these wines as we are. So, let's get started. I mean, like so many great Italian wine stories, this one begins way back in the past. And our sources suggest that winemaking in Molise actually predates the Romans.
It does.
Like even before those guys got there, civilizations like the Samnites were already cultivating grapes in this region. I don't know why, but that just kind of blows my mind. It's just such a long history.
Well, and it's true. And you have to think, why don't we know more about it? And
Why is that?
I think part of that has to do with Molise being geographically a little bit isolated, throughout history, maybe not
Right.
quite on those main trade routes.
Yeah.
But to your point, the Romans, when they arrived, they definitely saw the potential, and if you go there today, you can find archaeological evidence of that Roman winemaking.
So are we talking like ancient amphorae, things like that?
Exactly. You'll find, remnants of amphorae, remnants of wine presses, and it really paints a clear picture of Molise being part of this, ancient Italian winemaking world.
So from those early days, through the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, Molise was already kind of woven into that tapestry of Italian wine. But what happened next? As we go through the centuries, how did that ancient tradition evolve?
Well, like much of Europe during the medieval period, monasteries played a really vital role in keeping that winemaking knowledge alive. They kept maintaining the vineyards. They kept the wine flowing. In many ways, it was for religious reasons, but also to provide for the local communities.
Yeah, I could just picture those monks, carefully tending their vines. It's such a timeless image. But let's jump ahead now. Fast forward to more modern times. How did Molise wine kind of reclaim its place in the modern Italian wine landscape?
I think it's been a gradual resurgence. I mean, obviously, winemaking never completely disappeared, but it stayed, fairly localized, smaller scale. It's really in the late 20th century and the early 21st century that we've seen this renewed energy. Producers are putting a real focus on quality, on showcasing what makes Molise wines unique, and they're also, going back to those native grape varieties to really let them sing.
Which brings us to our two main topics for today.
Yes.
Terroir.
Yes.
And the native grapes of Molise. They really are the foundation of these wines.
It's the land, the soil, the climate, the geography. It's how those elements come together and how those indigenous grapes have adapted to those conditions over centuries.
Right.
That's where the magic happens.
And speaking of the land, our sources describe Molise as a place where sea meets mountain.
That's a good way to put it.
Which really paints a vivid picture. But how does that geographical reality translate into the character of the wines?
Well, you have to remember, Molise has a diverse terroir. I mean, you've got a relatively short stretch of the Adriatic coastline, and then the land rises quickly into the Apennine Mountains. So you have this dramatic shift in altitude. And that, combined with the influence of the sea, creates this incredible mosaic of microclimates within a fairly compact region.
Let's start with those coastal areas then. What can you tell me about the wines that come from that milder climate and those clay limestone soils? Like, what should I expect if I pop open a bottle from the Molise coast?
Well, the Adriatic coast brings this wonderful Mediterranean climate, so it's milder, sun-drenched, and you get those sea breezes. Combined with those clay limestone soils, you often get wines that are they're fresh, they have a really nice minerality and a balanced acidity, and you get these vibrant fruit and floral aromas, often with a little hint of that salty sea spray. It's pretty unique.
Sounds like you're almost tasting the landscape itself.
In a way, yeah.
So now let's move inland towards those Apennine Mountains. What happens to the wines as we climb in elevation?
As you go up into the mountains, things get a bit cooler, obviously, you still have those limestone and clay soils, but the cooler temperatures mean the grapes ripen slower
Okay.
and they develop more concentration. So think higher sugar levels, more tannins, and that translates into wines that are fuller bodied, more complex, and
Okay.
often have a greater potential for aging. What's interesting is that at those higher elevations, you also get a bigger temperature swing between day and night.
Ah.
And that really helps the grapes develop a wider range of aromas.
So we're seeing this clear shift from the lighter, brighter coastal wines to these richer, more structured mountain wines. It's almost like two different wine worlds within one small region. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Now, I noticed that some of our sources mention volcanic soils. Do those exist in Molise, and what kind of impact do they have? Ah, yes, volcanic soils are definitely present in some parts of Molise, and they add this really interesting layer of complexity. You get a unique minerality that's often described as flinty or smoky, maybe even a bit spicy. It's just another facet of the Molise terroir palette.
Right. So it's like the earth itself is adding these extra flavors to the grapes.
Hmm.
Now, when we look at Molise as a whole, our sources broke it down into three main subregions: Alto Molise, Molise Central, and the Littoral. Could you walk us through each one and just give us a quick overview of what makes them special?
Sure. Let's start with Alto Molise. This is in the Isernia province, up in the mountainous northern part of Molise. So
Yeah.
you've got that cooler climate, the calcareous and clay soils. These conditions are particularly good for white grapes,
Okay.
like Trebbiano and Malvasia. You get these fresh, aromatic, highly acidic wines. But interestingly, Alto Molise is also becoming known for its tintilia, which is a red grape,
Oh, wow.
and it produces some really elegant wines there.
So even in those cooler, higher elevations, that key red grape of Molise can still shine.
Absolutely. Now, Molise Central, that's mainly in the Campobasso province. It's a bit more mixed in terms of landscape. You get hills, you get some plains, and the soils are a mix of limestone, clay, and sandstone. This area is known for its tintilia too. You get well-structured wines, but the tannins are a bit softer. Nice red fruit and spice notes, and you'll also find some great Falanina and Greco being produced there.
So it's kind of like a transitional zone, you know.
Yeah.
It can do it all.
Right, right. And then we have the littoral. That's the narrow strip along the Adriatic coast, also in the Campobasso province. Warmer climate, mostly clay and sandy soils. Here you get fuller-bodied Montepulciano, which is another red grape, and some nice fresh Garganega, which is a white grape. And there's even a budding sparkling wine scene there, which is interesting. They often
Oh.
have this mineral saline character, probably from those sea breezes and the sandy soils.
It's amazing how much diversity you can pack into such a relatively small region. Now, our sources also pointed out that altitude and sun exposure are really important factors in molasses. Can you elaborate on why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. As we've talked about, higher altitudes mean slower ripening. That allows for more complex aroma development in the grapes. All those interesting flavor compounds have more time to emerge,
Right.
and the grapes retain more acidity, leading to more balanced wines.
And what about sun exposure? I mean, more sun, riper grapes, right?
Right. Generally speaking, yes, but
Yeah.
it's more nuanced than that. So vineyards on south-facing slopes, they get the most direct sunlight,
Hmm.
faster ripening, richer wines, higher sugars, maybe more pronounced tannins.
Mm.
North-facing slopes, less sun, slower ripening. Those wines will often have a brighter acidity and more delicate aromas. So winemakers really have to consider all these factors when they're planting their vineyards.
It's just fascinating how interconnected it all is.
Yeah.
The soil, the climate, the elevation, even which way the vineyard slopes.
Yeah.
It really shows that terroir is so much more than just a buzzword.
It is. It's a living, breathing thing
Right.
that
That's
shapes the wine in profound ways.
So let's talk about what's growing in this amazing terroir, the native grapes of Molise. Our sources call them a hidden treasure, and I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah.
Why do you think they've remained under the radar for so long?
I think part of it is just that they're not as well known internationally
Yeah.
as some of the bigger names in Italian wine. But they're really the key to understanding what makes Molise special.
Yeah.
They represent the region's its viticultural soul.
And the one that keeps coming up again and again is Tintilia.
Yes.
For someone who's never had it, how would you describe this grape?
Well, Tintilia it's the most distinctive red grape of Molise, and it's known for producing wines with this incredible deep ruby color. In fact, the name Tintilia actually means tinted, which refers to that color. And the wines, they're known for being very complex. Aromatically, you get red and black fruits. So think ripe cherry, blackberry, plum. You often get these nice floral notes like violet. And then warm spices, cinnamon, licorice. Sometimes you even get a hint of Mediterranean herbs or a bit of an earthy note.
Okay.
On the palate, Tintilia is typically medium to full-bodied. It has noticeable tannins, but they're well integrated. Good acidity, long finish. And these wines, they can age really well.
So it's a grape that takes its time, but it rewards patience. Okay.
Exactly. Now, another grape you'll find in Molise is Montepulciano,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, is grown in other parts of Italy. But in Molise, it takes on a unique character.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, it tends to produce wines that are very fruit-forward. The tannins are softer, more approachable. It has this nice balanced acidity, which makes it really food-friendly.
So maybe a bit less tannic than what you might find in, say, Abruzzo.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
And what about the white grapes? We've got Trebbiano Molisano, which I understand is different from the Trebbiano Toscano that most people know.
Yes, that's very important to note. Trebbiano Molisano is its own distinct variety, and it produces wines that are incredibly fresh and vibrant. You get a lot of citrus, lemon, lime, grapefruit, often some floral notes like white flowers, and then a nice minerality. It's a really refreshing wine.
It sounds like a really nice alternative to the sometimes neutral character of Trebbiano Toscano.
Yeah, I would agree.
And then there's Faleina. How does that grape perform in the Molise terroir?
Faleina in Molise it's fascinating because it seems to be able to produce a range of styles. It really depends on where it's grown and how it's made, but in general, it's known for having that refreshing acidity, and it has this really nice aromatic profile. You can get white fruits like pear and apple, sometimes some tropical notes, floral hints,
Wow.
and then, of course, a bit of minerality.
So another great example of an Italian white grape that really embodies that vibrancy and freshness that the country is known for. Our sources also mentioned a couple of other local grapes, Bianca Gentili and Sangiovese Tintoria. Can you give us a quick rundown of those?
Sure. Bianca Gentili is a white grape. It's known for having a very delicate and fresh aromatic profile. Lots of subtle floral and fruity notes. Sangiovese Tintoria is a red grape, and it's not usually bottled on its own, but it's used for blending.
Okay.
Because it brings this intense deep color, and it adds structure to red blends. And these lesser known grapes they're really a reminder that there's still so much potential in Molise.
Yeah, it's like a whole world of undiscovered grapes waiting to be explored. And speaking of potential, our sources talk about how all these grapes can be used to make a wide range of wine styles. Could you give us a quick overview of what's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tintilia it's very versatile. It can make wines that are meant to be drunk young and fruity and fresh.
Okay.
But it can also make wines that are structured, complex, age-worthy.
Right.
It's even being used to make rosé. Montepulciano in Molise, it typically makes those medium to full-bodied reds, nice fruit, softer tannins. Trebbiano Molisano, that's your go-to for those crisp aromatic whites.
Okay.
Faleina can make, a whole range of aromatic whites.
Right.
Bianca Gentila, another option for fresh and delicate whites. And then Sangiovese Tintoria, like I said, it's mainly used for blending to add color and structure.
So much to choose from.
Yeah.
Now let's move from the vineyard to the cellar. What's the winemaking scene like in Molise? Is it all about tradition, or are modern techniques starting to make their way in?
I think it's a really interesting balance of both. You definitely see that respect for traditional methods, but there's also this willingness to embrace modern techniques where they make sense.
Can you give me some examples of those traditional methods that are still practiced in Molise?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll still find winemakers using those old wooden basket presses for a very gentle extraction of the juice, and fermentation that often happens in large cement tanks or large wooden vats, and sometimes they'll use indigenous yeast, which are the yeasts that are naturally present in the vineyard and the cellar.
Okay.
And that can add a lot of complexity and a real sense of place to the wines. Aging is also traditionally done in large older oak barrels.
So there's a lot of history and kind of a romantic notion to those traditional methods. But on the modern side of things, what are some of the technologies or advancements that are starting to be used in Molise winemaking?
Well, you'll definitely see the use of temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks. That gives the winemakers a lot more control over the fermentation, and it helps to preserve those delicate aromas. Pneumatic presses are also being used for a more efficient and gentle extraction of juice. And then, of course, there's the use of selected yeasts and enzymes, which gives the winemakers more control over the fermentation process and the final style of the wine.
Sounds like Molise is really finding that sweet spot between tradition and innovation,
It is.
which is really cool to see. Now, our sources talked about the importance of the enologist in all of this. How would you describe their role in Molise?
The enologist and Molise, they really wear a lot of hats. They're interpreters of the terroir, they're craftsmen, they're guardians of tradition. They have this deep understanding of how the land influences the grapes.
Right.
And they make, all these crucial decisions throughout the winemaking process. It's a blend of science, art, and a respect for history.
They're like the conductors of the Molise Wine Orchestra.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Now, let's dig into some specific winemaking techniques that our sources highlighted. Maceration was one of them. Why is that step so important in Molise winemaking?
Maceration is essentially the process of letting the grape juice sit in contact with the skins after the grapes have been crushed.
Okay.
And it's crucial because this is how you extract color, tannins, aromas from those skins.
Okay.
Now, the length of time that you macerate the juice in the skins, that really varies depending on the grape and the style of wine you're making.
Right.
So for those big structured reds like Tintilia that you want to age,
Right.
you're going to macerate for longer to get those tannins and that deeper color and flavor. For lighter wines that you want to drink younger.
Right. You'll macerate for a shorter period.
Exactly. And for some white wines, they even do a very short maceration before fermentation.
Right.
It's called pellicular maceration. And that helps to enhance the aromatics and the texture.
It's like steeping tea, but with grape skins. Right.
It is, yeah.
And then there's aging. What are some of the things that Molise winemakers consider when it comes to aging their wines?
Well, aging is where the wines really develop their complexity, their character, and they can age in different types of vessels.
Okay.
So oak barrels, especially new oak barrels, they add flavors like vanilla, spice, toastiness.
Yeah.
Stainless steel tanks, they're often used for younger white wines or for red wines where you want to keep that fresh fruit character.
Right.
And then there's terracotta, which is becoming more popular. Terracotta adds this really interesting minerality and kind of a unique texture to the wine.
So each vessel really contributes something different to the final product.
Absolutely. Now, another thing that's becoming more common in Molise is the use of indigenous yeasts.
And what's the thinking behind that?
Well, a lot of winemakers believe that using indigenous yeasts, the yeasts that are naturally found in the vineyard, they believe that it allows them to really capture the essence of the terroir in a more authentic way.
Right.
So these yeasts, they're a reflection of the local microbial environment, and they can potentially create these more complex, more site-specific aromas and flavors.
So it's kind of a way of letting the vineyard express itself more and more naturally.
Exactly, but it's not without its challenges. I mean, indigenous yeast can be a bit unpredictable.
Right.
So it requires a lot of skill and attention from the winemaker.
Yeah, so it's like a high risk, high reward kind of situation.
In a way, yes, but it's exciting to see more and more winemakers experimenting with this.
And looking at the bigger picture of wine quality in Molise, what are some of the other factors that play a role?
We always have to start with the fundamentals. So soil quality, climate suitability, those are key. Then you've got the viticultural practices, so how the grapes are grown, how the vines are pruned, how the yields are managed. All of that has a huge impact on the quality of the grapes. And then, of course, there's the technology that's used. From grape handling to bottling, technology can really help to ensure consistency and high quality.
So it's really a holistic approach.
It is.
Where every step from the vineyard to the bottle matters.
It really does.
Now, let's talk about the end result of all of this hard work. What are the sensory profiles and the different wine styles that we might find in Molise?
This is where things get really exciting because Molise wines, they have this incredible range of aromas, flavors, textures. It's really a fascinating region to explore.
Let's start with the reds. What should we expect from a typical Tintilia or Montepulciano from Molise?
So with Tintilia, you're generally looking for a wine with that deep ruby color. And on the nose, it's complex. You've got those red and black fruits, cherry, blackberry, plum, often some floral notes like violet, warm spices like cinnamon, maybe some licorice, and some Tintilia. You might even get those hints of Mediterranean herbs or that earthy note that we talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
On the palate, it's usually medium to full-bodied. The tannins are noticeable, but they're well integrated, not harsh. Good acidity, long finish, and these wines can really develop with a bit of age.
That sounds like a really captivating red. Yeah. What about Montepulciano? How does that typically present itself?
Montepulciano from Molise, it also has that deep ruby color.
Okay.
And the aromas tend to be a bit more intense, more of those ripe red and black fruits.
Yeah.
Cherry, plum, black currant, often some spice notes like black pepper, licorice. And if it's been aged in oak, you might get some chocolate or coffee or tobacco.
Okay.
On the palate, it's usually medium to full-bodied. The tannins are often a bit more pronounced than in Tintilia.
Yeah.
Good acidity, persistent finish.
So maybe a bit bolder, a bit more tannic than Tintilia.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Now, what about those other red grapes we talked about, like Sangiovese and Aglianico?
Sangiovese and Molise, it often shows those classic bright cherry notes and that vibrant acidity. Aglianico tends to bring a bit more structure, firmer tannins, and some darker fruit flavors.
And moving over to the white wines now, Trebbiano Molisano and Falanghina. What kind of aromas and flavors should we be on the lookout for?
Trebbiano Molisano it's all about freshness. So think citrus fruit, lemon, lime, grapefruit, often some nice floral aromas, and then a touch of minerality.
Okay.
It's a really refreshing wine.
Sounds perfect for a warm day, out on the patio or something.
Absolutely.
What about Falanghina? What's its typical profile?
Falanghina from Molise it's usually dry, aromatic. It has this beautiful balanced acidity. You often get white fruits, pear, apple, maybe some peach, some nice yellow floral notes, maybe a little herbaceousness, and then again that touch of minerality.
So both really refreshing, but with slightly different aromatic profiles.
Right.
And we also talked about Greco Bianco and Malvasia Bianca being present in Molise. What can you tell us about those?
So Greco Bianco and Molise, it often has these tropical fruit aromas.
Okay.
Some floral notes, minerality. It's usually medium-bodied, balanced acidity. And then Malvasia Bianca, that's a grape that's known for its sweetness. So you get those ripe stone fruit aromas, honey.
Right.
And it's often used to make sweet wines, sometimes even fortified wines.
It's amazing how much variety there is. And our sources actually categorize the wines of Molise into several different styles. Could you walk us through those?
Yeah, sure. So one category is those young and fresh wines.
Okay.
These are wines that are meant to be enjoyed, in their youth. They emphasize that primary fruit character and that zesty acidity. So you're thinking younger Tintilia, most Trebbiano Molisano, most Falanghina.
Oh, yeah.
They're very approachable, very drinkable. Then you have those more complex wines that have aging potential. These are wines that have more depth, more structure. They can develop over time in the bottle. So think some of the higher end Tintilia, maybe some aged Montepulciano,
right?
Maybe even some Falanghina that's been aged in oak. Those wines, they really reward patience.
And then there's sweet wines. What's the situation with those in Molise?
Yeah, Molise does produce some lovely sweet wines.
Okay.
They're often made from late harvest grapes, so grapes that have been left on the vine long and develop more sugar.
Yeah.
Or they can be made from dried grapes. Moscato Bianco is used to make some nice sweet wines, classic peach and honey flavors. Yep. And you might also see some Pasito wines made from Malvasia or Falanghina, which are those rich, concentrated sweet wines with dried fruit and caramel flavors.
All right. And finally, there's the sparkling wines, which our sources said are becoming more popular.
Yeah, there's definitely some excitement around sparkling wine in Molise.
Oh.
They're using grapes like Falanghina and Chardonnay.
Okay.
And they're using both Charmat method, which is that's the method that's used to make Prosecco,
Right.
and the traditional
Which
method.
is like champagne.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you're starting to see a range of styles from, those fresh and fruity sparklers to more complex, more yeasty styles.
So it really sounds like Molise has something to offer everyone, no matter what your taste preference is.
I think that's very true.
Now, do you have any tasting tips for our listeners who might be inspired to go out and try some Molise wines? What should they be looking for?
Well, when you're tasting a Molise wine, first just take a moment to look at the colors, see how deep or how light it is,
Right.
and then give it a swirl, get those aromas going.
Hmm.
See if you can pick out those fruit notes, those floral notes, those spice notes we've been talking about
Right.
on the palate. Pay attention to that balance between the fruit, the acidity, the tannins in the red wines, and it's always fun to try wines from different parts of Molise to
Well,
see how the different terroirs express themselves, and don't be afraid to age some of those more structured reds like Tintilia and Montepulciano.
yeah, those are the ones that can really benefit from some time in the bottle.
Exactly.
So lots to explore and discover. Now let's move on to food pairings.
Ah, yes.
Our sources emphasize this idea of matching Molise wines with the region's traditional cuisine. What's the reasoning behind that?
It's a simple idea, but an important one.
Okay.
Food and wine from the same region, they just